You are where you are in life today because of all the things you've chosen to do and all the things you've chosen not to do in the past. So in today's show, I'm going to share with you 11 things successful investors don't do so you can move ahead in your investment journey. In my mindset moment, I'm going to explain the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And there is a vast difference. And then in my chat with Ahmad Imam, we're going to talk about the fears of first-time investors. So if you're a beginning investor wondering what's going on in the market at the moment and should you get in, shouldn't you get in, this conversation will be very useful. And even if you're not a beginning investor, you've probably got some of the fears that many investors have got at the moment, particularly beginning investors who don't have the perspective. So I'm sure this segment will be very useful for you too. So welcome to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Over the years, I've studied successful people, I've worked with them, I've mentored them, I've written about them. And so today I want to teach you some of the lessons I've learned, but not what they do. I want to explain to you 11 things successful people, successful investors don't do. The first one is that they don't concern themselves that the markets are unpredictable. Successful investors know that despite having the best plans, having the best strategies, there's always X factors coming out of the blue that may affect them negatively, so they protect themselves by planning for the worst, yet expecting the best outcome. Now, these factors can be local, they can be international, they can be political, they can be financial. Every year, things come out of the blue, sometimes on the upside to help you, sometimes on the downside. Don't concern yourself. That's normal. The second thing successful investors don't do is they don't accept things are true without questioning it. Property investors tend to look for information that confirms their hunch that a property strategy is right, or that investing in a particular region, location is right, or that a particular trend is happening. And I've found those who display this confirmation bias, this bias to try and find and prove what they initially think their hunch is right, they're the ones who are overconfident yet make the least money. It seems that we like to be right even though it costs us money. Instead, I found successful investors understand that most of us are ruled by our prejudices, so they maintain a healthy skepticism and they question new information before accepting it to be true. I've discussed this in the podcast before about biases, about confirmation bias being one of the big biases we have. So go back to the Michael Yardney podcast and do a search for why rational people behave irrationally. I thought that was a great episode. The third thing successful investors don't do is they recognize that wealth and success won't come easily. So I guess what they don't do is they don't think it will come easily. Successful investors don't look for the next get-rich-quick scheme. They set themselves up by living within their means, by budgeting, by sacrificing and saving today so that they've got a good future. They then invest their money and keep reinvesting it till it grows to build a substantial asset base. Wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. Another thing that successful investors don't do is they don't wait for the right time to take action. Look, successful property investors know that there isn't ever a right time to do anything. They've learned to gather the necessary information quickly, make an informed decision, and then they take appropriate action. They're able to see the big picture and they don't get caught up in the detail. And even when they don't have all the information necessary, not all the information they need, they believe it's better to make a decision with some of the information than not to make a decision at all. That's one of the success traits, the rich habits. People who are action takers are more successful. Another thing successful investors don't do is they don't try and do it all on their own. Successful investors know that if they're the smartest person in the room, they're in the wrong room. If they're the smartest person in the team, they're in trouble. And they're prepared to pay for good advisors and have mentors who inspire them, who motivate them, and who keep them accountable. Successful investors don't waste their time worrying. Interestingly, if you think about it, most of the things we fear about never ever happen. They're just monsters in our mind. And you know what? Even if they do happen, they'll most likely not be as bad as we expected. The lesson here is that you shouldn't take things too seriously, because that which seems like a really big problem today, you may not even remember in 5 years' time. We're going through a list of things successful investors don't do, and they don't give others the power to define success for them. So when you compare yourself to others, you let the outside world control how you feel about yourself. Successful people pursue what makes them happy without worrying about what others think, especially about other people's definition of success. The lesson here is to strive to become the best that you can be, and look how far you've come, what you've accomplished, how far you've grown. This is much harder today with Facebook and Instagram, where people are showing you their highlight reel, all the good stuff. They don't show you all the edits that have ended up on the cutting room floor, the bits that haven't worked, that haven't gone too well. And the other thing is, don't compare your chapter 3 or 4 or 5 with somebody's chapter 30 who's been doing it much, much longer than you. So the point I'm making is that successful investors don't give others the power to define success to them. They also don't dodge responsibility. Look, successful investors are human, so they make their share of mistakes, yet they're willing to accept responsibility and admit their faults. Sometimes negative experiences, mistakes and failures can be even better than a success, because you learn something new that another win wouldn't have ever taught you. Successful people don't ignore problems either. They confront their problems as soon as possible. Look, like all of us, they're tempted to neglect things that are difficult to deal with, but they tackle them anyway, because putting off a problem only turns it into a bigger one. I remember years ago reading a great book from Brian Tracy called Eat That Frog. Silly name, but what it said is, if you eat the frog first thing in the morning, that ugly, terrible, bad tasting thing first thing in the day, and you've got rid of it, the rest of your day is only going to get better. Good point, Brian Tracy. Successful investors don't speculate. Rather than following the latest fad, successful investors follow a time-proven strategy, and then they repeat it again and again, recognizing that you can't become an expert by doing one thing 100 times. Instead, they do one thing 100 times till they become proficient at it, till they can produce repeatable results. That's how they know they've become an expert. It makes their investing boring, but the results they get makes the rest of their life exciting. And the last of this list of things successful investors don't do that I'd like to share with you today is they don't forget the people who matter. So no matter how busy they may be, successful investors take time to tend to their personal relationships, knowing how empty life would be without love, without friendship. After all, success in business and investment is worth very little if you can't enjoy the fruits of your labour with people that are most important to you. Now, those of you who know me recognise that I don't think wealth has anything to do with how many properties you've got, how big your business is, how big your share portfolio is. I learned the hard way in the early part of my life, when I ruined the first half of my life, what true wealth is. And sure, money is important, but it's no use having all the money if you're sick in hospital, so you need money and your health. You need money and people who love you and who need you and to be with. Success is money plus time to be able to enjoy it. Success is money plus the ability to contribute back to the community. I think that's very important. True wealth is money plus the ability to keep growing and learning, and spirituality, and that means different things to different people. So true wealth has nothing to do with how much money you've got. Success isn't just about money, but we tend to speak a lot about money in this podcast because I guess any problem that money can solve isn't a problem anymore. So money is really, really important in those areas of your life where it's important, and not at all important in those areas where it's not important. Anyway, I've just explained to you what successful people don't do, maybe you can learn some lessons from that so that you can become more successful too. In a moment, I'm going to share with you my mindset moment where I'm going to discuss the difference between becoming rich and becoming wealthy. And they're vastly different. Once you understand the difference, I think you're going to be heading in the right direction. And then I'm going to have a chat with Ahmad Imam, Director of Metropole in Sydney, about the fears that he finds many beginning investors have. And even if you're not a beginning investor, you've probably got some of these concerns as well. So let's discuss what's happening in the property markets at the moment, how it affects beginning investors and more experienced investors as well. And if you are looking at getting into the property market at the moment, you probably recognise it's nowhere near as easy as it was a couple of years ago. And to become successful, you've really got to formulate a plan and use a proven strategy, because you've heard me say it before, 90% of investors never get past their first or second property. In fact, more than half of the people who get in the property market, buy a property investment, sell up in the first 5 years. And I guess part of the reason is they haven't put a strategic plan together. And that's one of the things that the team at Metropole does for our clients. So you probably know us as buyers agents. You probably know that we manage over $2 billion worth of property for clients in our property management division. I guess you know that we help our clients with renovations and property development. But do you know that we also start that journey off for most of our clients by putting together a strategic property portfolio plan, because that gives them clarity about what's possible. It gives them clarity about what's realistic. So why don't you go to metropole.com.au and find out about our strategic property plan, or just leave your details and have a chat with one of my team so we can discuss it with you. Because if we do put a plan together for you, and it does show you the sort of properties you're going to need, it shows you the sort of cash flow you're going to need to achieve your goals, wouldn't that be worthwhile? See, what we'd work out is where you are now and where you want to be, and then we explain the next steps and your likely timeline. Wouldn't that be worthwhile? So why not go to metropole.com.au and leave us your details and allow my award-winning team to help you get some clarity in these uncertain times. metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
There are a number of definitions of wealth. True wealth isn't really how many properties you've got, or how much money you've got, or how big your business is. But in my mind, it's what you're left with when they take all your money away. It's your health, it's your family, it's your friends, your spirituality, your contribution to society, your ability to be grateful. Now, I know I talk a lot about money in this podcast and success, but to me, true wealth isn't about money, as it's about those things I just mentioned. Of course, money's important in those areas in life where it's important, but it's not at all important in other areas of your life. Now, another definition of wealth that I read about is it's got to do with your time freedom. Robert Kiyosaki said there's a big difference between being wealthy and being rich, and I'm sure he's right. See, being rich doesn't mean you're wealthy. In fact, according to Robert Kiyosaki, the rich may have a lot of money, but they've generally got to keep working hard to earn it because they spend most of it. On the other hand, the wealthy, they've got money without having to work too hard for it, and their money covers all their expenses. Usually they've worked hard to get to the point where they've got a substantial business venture or property portfolio that covers their expenses. You've heard me say it before, unless you're making money while you're asleep, you'll never be wealthy. So the difference between the rich and the wealthy is the wealthy don't have to worry about money, while the rich do, because they generally spend most of what they earn because they've not quarantined enough of their cash aside to invest in income-producing assets. In fact, Kiyosaki believes that the definition of wealth is how long you can financially survive without working and still being able to maintain your living standard. So think about it. How long could you survive? Let's say your monthly expenses are, $7,000 and you've got $30,000 in savings. Your wealth is therefore, about 4.2 months or 128 days. So you can see how in one way wealth could be measured in time, not dollars. So I guess the question is, how do you become wealthy? Well, Interestingly, in Australia and in most of Western countries where this podcast is listened to, and I know it's listened to all over the world, at the end of the day, a lot of people can become rich because they're smart or they've got professional jobs. But the problem is a lot of them don't have the financial literacy to make their money work hard for them. So every time they get a pay rise or they get a promotion, instead of investing their windfall, instead of investing it in assets, they buy a new car or get a bigger house or renovate their house. And before you know it, their expenses have risen up to meet their new incomes. And that's going to continue to happen throughout their working lives. Interestingly, the wealthy do the opposite. They ensure they're always investing a portion of their income in some way, whether it's in real estate, in shares, in some income-producing assets that grow in value. They've also done the required research. They gathered a team of professionals around them to ensure that their investments are the very best ones for the financial goals that they've set for themselves, because one day they want to become wealthy. So they've put a strategy together to get there. They also don't want to spend the rest of their lives chasing their tails because their income disappears as fast as they've earned it. They'd rather be making their money work for them rather than the other way around. So the bottom line is, if you think about it, the rich are really poor because all they've got is money. On the other hand, the wealthy have a lot more than just money. Now, having said that, any problem that money can solve isn't really a problem. So why not set yourself up for more of it? However, only a small percentage of the population is ever going to be a self-funded retiree because there are very few of them with the financial intelligence to invest wisely during their working lives. The majority of people just spend the income that they've got during their peak earning years on the latest mod cons, exotic holidays, flash cars, latest technology, because they don't know the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And nowhere is that more important than when you're approaching your twilight years and all of a sudden we come across clients all the time at Metropole who realise that they've got very little to show for the millions of dollars they've made in their lifetime. Think about it. On the average wage, if you multiply that out over 10, 15, 20 years, especially as a couple, you will have had millions and millions of dollars go through your hands. Where is it today? Are you rich or are you wealthy? Times are changing. No longer is property news all good. You're reading the media, you're getting mixed messages, you're getting pessimists there, and that's causing some would-be property investors to doubt their decisions about getting into the property market and some experienced investors doubting about adding to their portfolio. I've found fear and uncertainty leads to procrastination and lack of action. You tell yourself, I'm going to get around to it, but interestingly, some investors just never do. So I've found to overcome fears, especially about property investment, you've got to ask yourself two questions. Number one, what is it that I'm actually scared of? What do I fear about investing? And number two, how realistic are those fears? To have a bit of a talk about how to overcome the biggest fears that many, especially beginning investors, are having in the market at the moment, we're going to have a chat with Ahmad Imam, Director of Metropole Properties in Sydney. Hello, Ahmad.
Hi, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I know we've been chatting personally over the last months about how the sentiment has changed. While the fundamentals are still pretty good for property, fear seems to have crept into the marketplace, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, the market sentiment right now is at an all-time low, in my opinion, but it's for a number of reasons. I think there are some elements that are valid, and a majority of them are definitely not valid.
Oh, there's no doubt that there were some concerns, but the property markets are having a soft landing. And I know that just with the constant media attention about property, and in general mainly negative, the fears some people have are paralysing. They come in, they have a chat with you and our other property strategists, and they just don't do anything. So I've found in previous cycles, what happens is they're the people that miss out because they don't get in till too late. Just looking back over the last decade, we've had two other downturns. This is the third downturn in the last decade, 2010-12, 2008-9 after the global financial crisis or in the early days of it. But look what happened to those people who managed to overcome their fears then. Look what's happened to the value of their portfolios. So, Ahmed, what strategies would you recommend for somebody to overcome their fears?
There's a few strategies, and it usually really does stem down to fear. But I seem to be having the same conversations over and over with my clients, so it's worth going through them. The first thing is you need to only listen to people who know what they're talking about. And I know it sounds easier said than done, but you would very well know, Michael, when it comes to real estate, every single person has an opinion. And you know what they say about opinions? They're just like belly buttons. Everyone has them. And in general, they're actually pretty useless.
That's right, Ahmad. You're right.
But while your family and friends may have the best intentions for you, you have to ask yourself, how many properties do they actually own? How long have they been doing this for? Are they actually financially free? Have they created wealth through property and done this before? So if they've only ever bought their home and never really invested, then they won't really understand why you might want to invest in property and what you're trying to do. So it's wise to only listen to people who have property investment runs on the board and have already achieved what you want to achieve, rather than those who've never really had the dreams that you've currently got.
So firstly, listen to people who have got opinions based on history, on track record, on fact, because if you've invested through a couple of cycles, it gives you the perspective to understand what's actually happening at the moment. What other advice have you got?
The other one is pretty important, and that's you have to understand the media's love of sensational headlines, especially as of late. I don't think I can pick up a newspaper or a magazine or turn on the news without hearing something about property and something that's not really responsible either. But bad news and sensational headlines, they sell newspapers. They create clicks on websites. But in general, property journalists are not economists. They're not finance strategists. They're not property experts. If you just look at all the mistaken predictions about the property market crash that have been in the media over the past decade, if you listened to that, you would not have done so well over the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years, having to hold your property initially. And of course, there are some specialist publications that have experienced property journalists on the staff, but the general news you might see online is likely written by some young cadet who is probably miffed about not being able to afford to buy that waterfront property in Bondi that he's writing about. And just like listening to experts, you should only read media stories that have been written by journalists who actually understand the economy, real estate, and how to create wealth through property.
Sure. Now, that's the reason why we have a series of experts write on Property Update, my daily blog every day, but they're people who've got property experience, who've got a track record, so be careful who you listen to, because you're right, in the general media, we've heard a lot about what's happened. Most of the journalists have now no longer on staff, they're freelancers, they're young people, and they love the sensational headlines. What else, Ahmad?
The other thing is you don't need to know everything before you get started. And this is something that a lot of people get caught up doing, especially the analytical people. They feel like they need to know every single thing about every aspect of property, from finance to statistics to superannuation, taxation. You don't need to know all that. If you want to know everything, you'll actually get to the stage where you're seriously procrastinating and you never really do get started. So be comfortable knowing that you have enough knowledge just to get started, and then understand that you're going to learn more along the way, because this is a long journey. There's no doubt. Accept that you're likely to make some mistakes, but minimize them by getting a good team around you, including an independent property strategist, a proficient tax accountant, and an investment savvy mortgage broker, and a good buyer's agent. And these people have the type of experience that money really can't buy, but you can hire these expertise and then profit from them.
That's a good point, because the lack of knowledge definitely does hold people back, thinking they need to know it all, but you'll never know it all. And experts similarly recognise that they don't know it all either. But your point about having a good team around you to mitigate your downside and minimise your downside makes a big, big difference.
Yep.
So how do you protect your risks?
There's a few different ways to protect your risk. And look, a lot of novice investors, they end up buying with their eyes wide shut, to the impact that it'll actually have on their finances in years ahead. No doubt a lot of people go into this journey and they overextend themselves financially, which is one of the biggest risks. Sophisticated investors, on the other hand, they have risk management strategies, which allow them to hold and grow their portfolio over the long term, which is essentially what we're trying to do. We're just trying to buy and hold and get through the downtimes. But they understand that while capital growth is the key to wealth creation, it's actually cash flow that will see them through. So sophisticated investors not only buy property, but time. which is crucial to this journey. So they buy time to see them through the rainy days, allowing them to last the distance. And they've got cash flow buffers, perhaps through a line of credit or an offset account to cover any shortfalls when their property is vacant, or whenever any unforeseen expenses arise as well.
So cash flow management is important as part of your risk mitigation strategies. Any other risk management strategies you should consider?
Yeah, there are. And look, it is going to be highly dependent on finance and the state of the financial environment. But, fixing the interest on a portion of your loan to minimize the risk of rising interest rates is helpful. Protecting yourself with life and income protection insurance is very much needed. Like I said, this is a long-term journey. You are getting yourself into debt. So you do have to protect yourself. And taking out things like landlord insurance to cover for damage to your property or any unpaid rents as well.
Sure. So there's a number of ways of protecting your risks. And if you're protecting yourself, then that will, I guess, minimize some of the fears you've got. One last tip, Ahmad, if you want to overcome your fears about getting involved in property.
Sure. I think a lot of people get caught up with all the risks involved. What the worst case scenario is it the top or the bottom of the market? And it causes them to procrastinate, like we discussed. But the biggest risk is actually not taking action, and Michael, that money doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are or where you come from or what you've done. No matter what you did yesterday, today begins anew, and you have the same rights and opportunities as every single other person to create wealth and to build wealth. But the sad reality is that majority of Australians will never actually achieve that financial freedom because they don't take action. They get caught up with all these risks and what the media is saying, and causes them to procrastinate for years, if not decades. So you can choose to overcome your fears and take your financial future in your hands, which is very important because, of course, while property investing may be simple, it's not easy. And I know that sounds like a bit of a play on words, but the fact is around 20% of those who get involved in property investment sell up in their first year, and close to half sell their property in the first 5 years. And of those investors who actually stay in property, 90% never get past their second property. 90%. So if you want financial freedom from property investment to fund your lifestyle and fund your dreams, you're going to have to do something different to what most property investors are doing. And they say that history has a strange way of repeating itself, but I don't actually agree with that. History only repeats itself if we haven't learnt from history.
Good point, yes. You don't have to be the same as other people. Good news is you actually can do things differently.
Absolutely.
So to grow your property portfolio business one property at a time, understand what's happening in the market, assess the potential risks, but then overcome the fears by getting a good team around you, have a number of risk mitigation strategies in place to protect you, and then slowly grow your property portfolio one property at a time. So everyone has little fears, whether they're successful investors, experienced business people, or beginners. But successful people actually use those fears to drive them forward and take action rather than to procrastinate. Ahmad, if we want to take it a step further and have a chat with you or your team about getting involved in property, how do we do that?
Yeah, sure. You can contact us at 1300 Metropole. One of our lovely staff will have a chat to you and organise an initial consultation just to see if we can actually add value. You can also jump on our website, metropole.com.au, and book in a session with myself and my team.
I hope you got some benefit from today's show. And if you did, please tell somebody about it, because it's a great way of passing the message forward, as I'm trying to do with you, because my aim is to help as many people as possible become financially successful by not making the mistakes so many others make. And that's why I started right at the beginning by explaining to you what successful investors don't do. Now, if you got benefit, I'd also really appreciate it if you left a review, as I got a great one from 81 Kizza, left on Apple Podcast, a 5-star review saying, "This podcast helped me and my family immensely. It's given us confidence to buy an investment property and start our journey to financial independence. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your knowledge with us." Well, boy, do I love those sort of messages where I've helped you move to the next level. If I read out your review, just email me, michael@metropole.com.au, and I'll be happy to gift you one of my books. And in between these podcasts, which I now give you twice a week, if you want to find out more information about money, property, success, getting to the next level, go to propertyupdate.com.au, my daily newsletter, where you're going to get information about money, success, finance, tax, personal development from a raft of experts. propertyupdate.com.au. You'll get a regular daily insights, and look forward to catching up with you real soon again on the Michael Yardney podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?